Well, Democrats and Republicans are condemning President Trump's abrupt decision to withdraw all U.S. ground troops from Syria. The president tweeted this morning, "It's time for other nations to fight ISIS." Pentagon officials and the State Department are scrambling to get troops, equipment, and diplomats out of war-torn Syria safely.
A senior U.S. official said last week that ISIS holds 1% of the territory it once held. But that's not the whole story. The Pentagon estimates there are still up to 30,000 ISIS fighters in Syria. The president declared victory on Twitter against the advice of his top national security advisors. Just 2 weeks ago, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said only 20% of local forces have been trained to fight against ISIS. CBS News senior global affairs contributor Ian Bremmer is president of Eurasia Group. Good morning, Ian.
Good to see you guys. So
we have two issues. There's a situation with ISIS, and then there is Russia and Iran in Syria. Let me start with that second piece. What happens if the U.S. is out of Syria? What kind of vacuum does that create?
Not very much, to be completely honest with you. I mean, look, Assad has won. President Obama said Assad must go. Obama's gone. Assad is still there. It is embarrassing to admit that Assad has won. But 5 million Syrian refugees and 500,000 dead Syrians from the war already know that, right? So the fact that we're cutting and running, it wasn't as if the United States had the leverage on the ground. That was the Russians, that was the Iranians, that was the Turks. Those were the countries that were willing to commit a lot because Syria mattered as a high priority of foreign policy to those countries. For the United States, it did not. And for someone like President Trump, who has been saying, I want to get these guys out, the interesting thing is he waited for 2 years. Obviously, Mattis, Secretary of Defense, and others have a lot less influence today than they did before. But it's not that this is such a surprise.
Why do you call it cutting and running? Why not say that the military has done its job? It has virtually eliminated the caliphate, that the argument to stay is just to make sure it doesn't grow back. What are our national security interests there?
That is a very good question, and the average American has not had a good answer for that, or in Afghanistan, or in the Iraq War, right? I mean, the fact is that if you go and look near military bases, those were people and families that voted for Trump. They voted for Bernie Sanders. They weren't voting for Hillary. They weren't voting for Jeb. They don't like the idea that we're fighting these wars on the back of the poorest, the least privileged. They come back. They're not heroes. We don't take care of them, right? So as many people as complain that Trump hasn't actually gone and visited troops in war zones, how about not having war zones?
But I wasn't looking for the political answer to that. I was actually asking for what is, as your expert, then what is our national security interests in Syria?
Well,
Is this a gift to President Putin that Trump has given Putin?
I would argue the gift came from Obama. Frankly, it was when the United States said, yes, we're going to get rid of this guy, and then chemical weapons, that's a red line, and then we didn't use it. Certainly, Putin welcomes the fact that the Americans are leaving, and there are many leaders around the world, including many historically in the U.S., that say, even if it's in America's interest to leave, if it's leverage that you can use against the Russians and the Iranians and even your allies, the Turks, you shouldn't just give it to them. You should get something in return. That's fair.
So, Ian, are you saying it's not such a bad decision, but maybe the way it was executed was not the way to do it?
Oh, there's no question that Trump is very capable of doing intelligent things in very stupid ways. And this is one of many examples of that. Like, you don't want to do it by tweet. You don't want your own national security team to not know this was your decision. You don't want, sort of the allies that are fighting on the ground in Syria or supporting us with logistics and intel to suddenly find out, oh, here's a decision that's been, we didn't hear about this during the G20 in Argentina.
But the decision itself, you're saying, no big deal.
At the margins, would it be better if the Americans were more engaged in fighting terrorism around the world? Sure. But there are so many other things that we could be doing with that money. And frankly, the average American, Democrat, Republican, indifferent, not the foreign policy establishment, but the average American is not getting a lot of bang for buck out of being on the ground in Syria. And I don't think you'll hear that from many of the experts, but I think it is a reality.
Still stunning that the Joint Chiefs of Staff was left in the dark about this.
I wish that were stunning, but it's unfortunate.
Ian, thank you.
Good to see you.